I was driving across country with my mum and sister when I was 16 and my sister was 20. It was late, but we were well rested still and alert. We were driving along an interstate and needed gas and a bathroom break, so we stopped at the only rest stop in 200 miles. There was a van full of teenagers on a road trip at the gas station, as well as a small grey car parked at the pump in front of us with two young men standing still outside of it. When we got there, everything felt wrong. We'd been on the road for days and seen many rest stops at night and had never been afraid until then. My mum and sister went inside and I stayed in the car. I heard the teenagers say they were creeped out and couldn't get the pump to work, and they left in a hurry. I was watching the car in front of us, and the two men had not moved at all. Not an inch. They weren't talking. They weren't on phones. They were just standing there, still as stone. My sister and mum came running back out to the car, and when they got in, the two men slowly turned to look at us, while not moving or pivoting the rest of their bodies. And I swear to fucking shit, we all saw the same thing. They had eyes dark as pitch and empty. Truly empty. Not black, not reflecting any light at all, just a void. We sped out of there and didn't stop until we were in the next city. The worst thing about the entire experience? We couldn't find the place on any map. We knew exactly which spot on the interstate to look, and we couldn't find it on Google Maps or any paper map we had. We even asked locals about the creepy gas station out on that stretch of road and got only confused looks. We've traveled on that interstate since and there is no rest stop. This is a story from a couple of years ago when my buddy and I were out running and stumbled on something very strange. I live in a quiet small town at the time with a large industrial plant nearby where most of the people work at. But there are a few that don't get their breadcrumbs from legit sources, for example the local gangs. Luckily, when they have their dispute, they usually shoot and harass the other gangs in the area and spare the locals who live there. I have not stumbled upon any unrest in this matter and have never been in any crossfire before this day. Me and my buddy were preparing to take a long run around town, taking some small roads and trails to get the miles clocked in. We started running through some back roads, just enjoying the run and some small talk about some games we played at the time. We took some right and left turns, and after a couple of miles my friend said he knows a small path to the next neighborhood. It's a path over some train tracks where there are usually no trains running, which makes it safe to run over. And it's quite a fun path with some ups and downs. Also, it's a nice forest to be in. A very sparse pine tree forest with some very large trees. We ran for 1 minute on this path, and I noticed that a bit further down, there was a duffel bag under a small bush on the right side of the path. It's a new bag that seems to be full of something. In my head, I thought at first, it must be someone who had forgotten it there. But then I remembered that this path is not any path someone goes down with a duffel bag, usually some people running like us. I said to my friend, "Did you see the bag?" And he of course answered yes. Then I asked him, "Shouldn't we look what's inside?" And he answered, "Nah, it's probably nothing inside." So we continued down the path and didn't think much of it. Now the strange part comes. We have just passed the train tracks, and a couple of yards further, we see a man standing in a black suit and talking to someone on the phone. He seemed pretty surprised that we were running there as well as that he was standing there. He had some black leather gloves on, was quite muscular, and the phone looked like the phone you get from a kiosk. My heart had started racing, and my adrenaline had started pumping. What would this man do with us? He may have a gun on him. A man with a suit has no reason to be here in the forest. But I tried to act cool and nodded him a hi, but he was still on his phone talking to someone and seemed not touched by us running beside him on the path. A while after we had encountered this strange man in the black suit, we asked each other, "What was in that bag? He must have been searching for that bag." That's when I understood what could have happened to us if we had taken that bag with us or searched for the bag's content, and he came strolling down that path. This story still gets me shivers down my spine to this day. But I can't stop thinking about what could have been in this bag, but I know for sure that I don't want to meet this black-suited man ever again. This happened about 20 years ago. I was 9 years old at the time, but my parents have also told me their side of the story on a bunch of different occasions, so that should help. My parents are both biologists. They met at work, and from there, it's history. The place where they worked at the time was a government building dedicated to biology research used in government projects turned towards the public, meaning they were the ones studying the environment and making environmental protection laws around their studies. This, being a massive old government building, always had a security guard present, day and night. During the day, these security guards would mostly just stay at reception and greet people. But at night they would go do their rounds and make sure there were no intruders because of all the science equipment and computers kept in the building. One of these guards is the "let's not meet" guy. Initially, he seemed like the nicest person. He was really nice to me, and frankly all the memories I have from him before this were really nice. He would greet me and talk to me in the nicest way every time my parents brought me to work. He would make me paper planes, which he was surprisingly good at, and throw them around with me, and he would stay with me at reception in the days my parents had to work into the night. Obviously for me, that would get really boring, really fast, so he'd keep me company and entertain me. Mostly we would talk, play with the paper planes and watch TV. It all seemed nice enough. Nice enough for my parents to trust him with me, which was probably their biggest mistake. One night my parents had to work even later than usual. I think it was around 10 p.m. and they were still at it, so this guy, who was on the night shift, decided to take me around the building with him to do his rounds. We started on the top floor, checking all the rooms and the exterior part on the roof. Every room was so dark that I'd always stay a little behind and wait for him to turn on the lights. Then we stepped down to the second floor, where my parents' office and labs were. We checked the opposite side of the building, going into labs with massive extractors, microscopes, and every kind of science equipment you might think of. We walked down the stairs to the first floor where most of the administration rooms were. I still remember seeing some maps on the walls and embalmed fish everywhere serving as decorations. First floor was all clear, so it was time to check the 2 basement levels. I thought it would have made sense to check the labs on the right side first, as the left side had a flight of stairs at the end leading up to where my parents were. But for some reason he decided we'd go check that side first. We checked all the labs, but I noticed his pace was accelerating and he was starting to look and sound happier, excited even. Once again, we checked all the labs, all the corners from one end to the other, turning the lights on ahead of us and turning them off behind us when we left. When we got to the last area, he turned all the lights on and we went inside. There were 3 separate offices on each side of the lab, and on the first one, he hurried towards the printer, opened it up, took out 2 pieces of paper and made 2 quick paper planes. That's when everything changed. He picked up one of the planes, went outside of the office and threw it towards the end of the room. Then he told me the one he just threw was mine, and that we could throw them around in there. I ran to the other side of the room to pick my plane up, excited to play with it, and suddenly the lights went off. When I turned around to check what was happening, I saw him getting out of the lab, turning the lights off and locking the door. I ran to the door, punched it and kicked it while screaming for him to open, panic taking over me because of how scared I was of being in the dark at the time. Through the glass on the door, I could see him scurrying away in the corridors, turning the lights off as he went and disappearing after turning a corner. I'm pretty sure that everything I felt and every shadow and creepy monster I saw in there while waiting was part of my imagination because of how scared I was. I balled up against a corner and could see shadows moving around me in the dark. I could only cry, lost, without knowing what was happening and why he was doing that. My parents finished work eventually, and when they did, they packed up their things and made their way to the lobby to pick me up and go home. When they got there, the security guard was at reception, but I was nowhere to be found. They panicked, of course, must have shouted 100 different cuss words at the guy, and I'm not sure how my dad didn't murder him right then and there. But when they first asked the guy where the hell I was and what he had done with me, he simply said that he had gone to do the rounds with me, and I must have gotten lost somewhere. This is a building that would take you about an hour and a half to check from top to bottom, even if you're rushing, so must have gotten lost somewhere is not exactly helpful. They looked for hours without finding me. It was only when I saw a light far at the end of the corridors leading to the lab I was in that I got the courage to stand up, rush towards the door and start punching it as hard as I could. They finally found me there and made the guard unlock the door to get me out. I don't really remember sleeping that night, and if I did, it must have been out of exhaustion. But I know I made my mum stay in the bedroom with me the entire night. Of course, my parents made a complaint against the guard, and when they did, and the guy started being investigated, he was fired and arrested. Not because of locking me away where he probably hoped no one would find me, but because he had been partnering up with other criminals to steal computers and equipment from the building to sell in some shady market, along with the information in the hard drives, and make money off it. By then, he had stolen a lot of old computers without anyone realizing, and who knows what his plans were for me that night. I'm not convinced that locking a crying child in the middle of the darkness, hidden away in some room, is exactly the most normal behavior if you're not trying to hide them and come get them later when everyone has left and sell them as part of your product. Luckily, he never had the chance to do that, and I really hope he never got to do it to any other kid.